Kim Jun walked toward the security checkpoint at Kepler Station. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. The station was huge, bigger than most cities back on Earth. Thousands of beings from different worlds moved through the wide hallways. Some had fur, some had scales, and others looked like walking trees. But they all had one thing in common: they stayed away from humans when they could. Jun pulled his old jacket tighter around his chest. The fabric was worn and patched in many places. He had been wearing it for 3 years now, ever since he left the mining world of Petra 7. Before that, he wore it on the ice planet Korvax. And before that, on a dozen other worlds where nobody asked too many questions about his past. The security line moved slowly. A large blue creature with 6 arms was having trouble with the scanner. It kept beeping and flashing red lights. The security officer, a Zelati with long tentacles instead of arms, waved the creature through anyway. These scans were mostly for show. The real security happened in the bioscanner, where every living thing got checked against the galactic database. Jun watched the other travelers. A family of small, furry beings from the outer rim chatted in their clicking language. 2 tall, thin aliens with silver skin stood perfectly still, like statues. A group of human traders laughed loudly about some deal they had just made. Normal people living normal lives. He envied them. Next, called the Zelati officer. His voice sounded like water flowing over rocks. Jun stepped forward. The bioscanner was a tall, clear tube that came up from the floor. Blue light filled it from top to bottom. He had been through hundreds of these scanners on dozens of worlds. Usually, they just checked for weapons or dangerous diseases. Sometimes they looked for wanted criminals. But they all connected to the same galactic database, and that database knew things about him that he wished he could forget. "Place your hands on the scanner and stand still," the officer said without looking up from his screen. Jun put his hands on the warm metal plates. The blue light swept down his body, then back up. It moved slowly, carefully, like it was taking pictures of every part of him. The light passed through his jacket as if it was not there. Jun held his breath. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this scanner was too old, or maybe the database was down for repairs. The light stopped moving. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the alarms started screaming. Red lights flashed everywhere. The bioscanner made loud beeping sounds. The Zelati officer's tentacles went stiff, like someone had shocked him with electricity. His large, dark eyes got even bigger as he stared at his screen. "What is it?" Jun asked, even though he already knew. The officer did not answer. He just kept staring at the screen. Other security officers came running from different parts of the checkpoint. They all gathered around the first officer's screen. Jun could see their faces change as they read whatever was there. Fear. Shock. Some of them took steps backward. "Step aside, human," the first officer whispered. His voice was shaking. "Move to the holding area. Do not make any sudden moves." Jun sighed. It was happening again. He stepped out of the bioscanner and walked to where the officer pointed. It was a small area surrounded by clear walls. He had been in holding areas like this before. They were designed to keep dangerous people away from everyone else while the authorities decided what to do with them. As he walked, he noticed that the other travelers were starting to stare. Word spread fast on space stations. The furry family stopped their clicking and pointed at him with small, clawed fingers. The silver-skinned aliens turned their heads to watch him. Even the human traders stopped laughing. A Krillin warrior, huge and covered in thick, dark fur, saw him and made a strange sign with his clawed hands. Jun recognized it. It was a prayer for protection, or maybe a blessing for the dead. The Krillins believed that some fights were so terrible that they marked a person's soul forever. An Ilari merchant, small and pale with large, sad eyes, packed up her stall quickly when she saw him. The Ilari were peaceful people who hated violence of any kind. To them, Jun was probably worse than a serial killer. But it was the Vorth that surprised him most. These ancient beings were tall as trees and twice as old as human civilization. They almost never paid attention to younger species like humans. But now, 3 of them turned their massive heads to look at him. Their eyes were like deep pools of water, and they stared at him with something that might have been respect. By the time Jun reached the holding area, half the checkpoint had gone quiet. People whispered to each other in dozens of different languages, but he caught enough words to know what they were saying. Planet Killer. World Destroyer. The one who burned New Harvest. Jun sat down on a metal bench and closed his eyes. He had hoped to make it to the transport terminal without any trouble. All he wanted was to buy a ticket to some quiet world where nobody knew his name or his story. A place where he could work with his hands and sleep without nightmares. but the scars on his chest burned like they always did when people stared at them. Even through his jacket, even through the years that had passed, they remembered. The geometric patterns cut into his skin by superheated plasma. The price he had paid for pressing a button that saved billions of lives and ended 847 others. He should have known his past would never let him go. Lee Day woke up at 6 in the morning, just like he had every day for the past 2 years. The sun was coming up over the green fields of New Harvest, and he could smell the sweet scent of growing rice through his small apartment window. He made coffee and checked his messages. There was one from his girlfriend Mina back on Earth. She was still waiting for him to save enough money to bring her to New Harvest. Soon, he had promised her. Maybe next year. He put on his work clothes and walked to the fusion plant. New Harvest was a quiet world where Korean families had built farms that fed 3 different star systems. The fusion reactors provided clean energy for the farming equipment and the small cities scattered across the planet. It was peaceful work. Safe work. The kind of job where the most dangerous thing that happened was a computer glitch or a broken pipe. Day was 26 years old and good at his job. He understood how the reactors worked, how the plasma flowed through the geometric conduits that covered the reactor walls like a maze. The patterns were beautiful in their own way, like art made from pure energy. He had been working on reactor number 3 for 6 months, making sure it ran perfectly. That morning, he was checking the output levels when his supervisor called him over to the main control room. The older man looked worried about something. Day, look at this, his supervisor said, pointing at a screen full of numbers. The power draw from Sector 7 is wrong. It should be steady, but it keeps jumping up and down. Day studied the numbers. Sector 7 was mostly farmland, with a few small towns. There was no reason for the power to change so much. Maybe it's the weather control system, he suggested. Sometimes it uses extra power when a storm is coming. His supervisor nodded. Check it out. If it's broken, we need to fix it before it causes problems. Day took a hovercar to Sector 7. The drive was pleasant, through fields of green crops and past small farms where families worked in their gardens. Children waved at him from their yards. Everything looked normal and peaceful. He was halfway to the weather station when the sky caught fire. The first thing he saw was a black shape dropping through the clouds. It was huge, bigger than the biggest building on New Harvest. More shapes followed it, dozens of them, falling like black rain from the blue sky. They hit the ground with sounds like thunder, and where they landed, the earth began to change. Day stopped his hovercar and got out. In the distance, he could see machines rising from the crash sites. They were unlike anything he had ever seen before, tall, angular things that moved with horrible purpose. Where they walked, the green fields turned gray and lifeless. The machines were eating the land itself, turning living soil into something dead and empty. His communicator crackled with emergency signals. Voices were shouting over each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then came the message that made his blood freeze. This is Planetary Defense Command. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. All civilian aircraft are grounded. Repeat, all civilian aircraft are grounded. Seek shelter immediately. Day looked up at the sky and saw the evacuation ships. They were trying to leave the planet, carrying as many people as they could. But more black shapes were falling from space, and some of them were attacking the ships. He watched in horror as one of the evacuation ships exploded in a ball of orange fire. Pieces of it fell like burning stars. His communicator buzzed with a personal message. It was from the fusion plant. All staff report immediately. Emergency protocols in effect. This is not a drill. Day drove back to the plant as fast as the hovercar would go. The roads were full of people trying to escape, families with children and old people who moved too slowly. Some of the black machines had reached the main highway and were tearing it apart, turning the concrete and metal into raw materials for something else. At the plant, his supervisor was waiting with bad news. The defense grid is down, he said. The things out there, they're called devourers. They eat entire planets. They've done this before, to other worlds. How do we stop them? Day asked. His supervisor shook his head. We don't. We evacuate who we can and hope someone in the fleet can destroy them from space. He paused. But there's a problem. The evacuation ships can't carry everyone. We have maybe 2 hours before those machines reach the main cities. Day looked at the reactor control panels. He had worked with these machines for 2 years. He knew every pipe, every conduit, every safety system. And he knew what would happen if those safety systems were turned off. What if we overload the reactors? He asked quietly. His supervisor stared at him. That would crack the planet's crust. Everything would die. Everything's going to die anyway, Day said. But if we time it right, we might take those machines with us. They stared at each other in silence. Outside, they could hear explosions getting closer. The evacuation ships, his supervisor said finally. Some of them might still get away. Day nodded. He was thinking about Mina, back on Earth. She would never understand why he had to do this. Nobody would understand. But 847 people were still on New Harvest, and billions more lived on other worlds that the Devourers would attack next. He walked to reactor number 3, the one he knew best. The geometric plasma conduits glowed like a beautiful, deadly maze on the walls around him. His hands were steady as he began to turn off the safety systems, one by one. Park Hyun sat in the holding area and watched the crowd grow larger. What had started as curious stares was becoming something much bigger. Beings from across the galaxy were gathering at the security checkpoint, all wanting to see the human who had destroyed a planet to save the universe. A young woman pushed through the crowd toward him. She had dark hair and carried a recording device in her hand. Her clothes marked her as someone from Earth, probably a journalist from one of the news services that followed stories across the galaxy. "Excuse me," she said to the security officer. "I need to speak with him." The Zelati officer's tentacles waved nervously. Nobody is allowed to approach the prisoner. "He's not a prisoner," the woman said firmly. "Check your laws. Planet killer survivors have special status under Galactic Protection Act 247. He can refuse to speak, but you can't stop me from asking." Hyun looked up at her with tired eyes. She was young, maybe 25, with the eager look of someone who thought she could change the world with the right story. He had been like that once, before New Harvest. "You're him," she said, stepping as close to the clear wall as the guards would allow. "You're the one who stopped the Devourers 15 years ago. My name is Shin Hannah. I'm a reporter for the Terran Broadcasting Network. I want to tell your story." "There's no story," Hyun said quietly. "Just a man who pressed a button when he had to." But even as he spoke, he could see that wasn't true. The crowd around them proved it. In the 15 years since New Harvest died, his actions had become something larger than just one man's desperate choice. Near the front of the crowd, 3 Krillin warriors stood with their arms crossed over their massive chests. They were covered in thick, dark fur and had claws that could cut through metal. The Krillins were known across the galaxy as fierce fighters who respected courage above all else. One of them, an old female with gray streaks in her fur, stepped forward. "You carry the scars of honor," she said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "My people sing songs of the human who chose death before defeat. You are welcome in any Krillin home." On the other side of the crowd, a group of Ilari merchants had gathered. They were small, pale beings with large eyes that always seemed sad. The Ilari had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. They believed that all life was sacred and that violence was never the answer to anything. "Monster," one of them whispered. "He murdered an entire world. Billions of plants and animals died because of him." "The world was already dying," Hannah said, turning toward the Ilari. "The Devourers were stripping it bare. He saved billions of lives." "No life should be sacrificed for another," the Ilari replied. "There is always another way. He chose the path of destruction because it was easier than finding the path of peace." The argument spread through the crowd. Some beings nodded in agreement with the Krillins, praising Hyun's courage and sacrifice. Others sided with the Ilari, calling him a war criminal who had committed the ultimate sin. Station security moved closer, their hands on their weapons. But the strangest reaction came from the Vorth. The ancient beings were among the oldest species in the galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. They were tall as trees, with skin like bark and eyes like deep pools of still water. Most of the time, they ignored younger species completely. But now, 3 Vorth had pushed through the crowd to get closer to Hyun. They stood perfectly still, studying him with those ancient eyes. One of them, older than the others, spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. "The pattern bearer," it said. "The one who carries the marks of the great choice. We have seen this in our dreams." "What does that mean?" Hannah asked, pointing her recorder at the Vorth. "Some choices echo through time," the ancient being replied. "Some sacrifices touch the very fabric of existence. This one carries the scars of such a choice. The patterns burned into his flesh speak of futures saved and paths that might have been." Hyun touched his chest unconsciously. Even through his jacket, he could feel the geometric scars that covered his skin. They were precise, angular patterns that matched the plasma conduits he had worked with in the reactor chamber on New Harvest. When the reactor overloaded, the superheated plasma had burned through his clothes and into his flesh, leaving permanent marks that no surgery could remove. The doctors had called them plasma channel burns. They said he was lucky to be alive. But to the beings gathered around him now, the scars meant something more. They were proof of what he had done, a permanent reminder of the choice that had saved the galaxy. "You see?" Hannah said, still recording. "You're not just a man who pressed a button. You're a legend. Your story has spread to every world, every species. Some see you as a hero, others as a villain, but everyone knows your name." More beings were arriving at the checkpoint. Word was spreading through the station's communication networks. Soon, there would be hundreds of them, all wanting to see the planet-killer survivor with their own eyes. Station security was getting nervous. The crowd was growing larger and more agitated. Arguments were breaking out between different groups. The Krillins were facing off against the Alari. Other species were taking sides or trying to stay neutral. "This needs to stop," the head security officer said to Hannah. "You're creating a dangerous situation." But Hugh knew it was too late. The legend had found him again, just like it always did. No matter how far he traveled or how well he hid, someone always recognized the scars. Someone always remembered the story. Whether he wanted it or not, he would always be the human who destroyed a world to save the galaxy. Station security finally cleared the crowd from the checkpoint, but the damage was done. Everyone on Kepler Station now knew that the planet-killer survivor was here. June was moved to a private room while the authorities decided what to do with him. He didn't mind. The quiet was better than the staring and whispering. After a few hours, they let him go to the observation deck. It was a large room with huge windows that looked out into space. Most people came here to watch the ships coming and going from the station. June came here for a different reason. He stood at the biggest window and looked toward a certain part of the sky. There was nothing special to see there now, just stars and empty space. But 15 years ago, that's where New Harvest had been. A green world with farms and small cities, where families grew food for 3-star systems. Now there was just a cloud of dust and rocks, slowly spreading through space. "You come here often," a voice said behind him. June turned around. A woman was walking toward him. She was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes. Her tentacles were shorter than most Zalati, and she moved more like a human than like her own species. She wore a doctor's coat with small symbols that showed she was a mind healer. "Dr. Song Minotaur," she said, introducing herself. "I specialize in helping people who have lived through impossible things. The station commander asked me to talk with you." "I don't need help," June said, turning back to the window. "Everyone needs help," Minotaur replied. She stood beside him and looked out at the same patch of empty space. "Especially people who carry the weight of entire worlds." They stood in silence for a while. Other people walked through the observation deck, pointing at different stars and talking about their travels. Normal people living normal lives. "You know their names?" Minotaur said softly. It wasn't a question. June was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "All 847 of them." "Tell me about one," she said. June closed his eyes. The names and faces were always there, waiting for him. Bae Junseo. He was 23 years old. He had just finished his teaching certificate and was going to start working at the elementary school in Sector 5. He loved children. He wanted to teach them about the stars. What happened to him? He was at the school when the evacuation order came, June continued. The building was old and the communication system was broken. By the time someone got there to tell him what was happening, the transport ships were already full. He was supposed to be on the next ship, but there wasn't time. Minotaur waited for him to continue. Kim So-young, 34 years old. She had twin daughters back on Earth, 5 years old. She came to New Harvest to work in the medical center and save money to bring her girls to live with her. She was supposed to go home for their birthday next month. June opened his eyes and stared out at the empty space where New Harvest used to be. She was in the medical center helping with evacuation preparations when the reactor exploded. The building was too close to the blast zone. "And the third one?" Minotaur asked gently. Park Dong-wook, 45 years old. He grew the best tomatoes in 3-star systems. Everyone said so. He had this little farm in Sector 7, just him and his wife. They had been married for 20 years and never had children, so the tomatoes were like their babies. He knew everything about soil and water and sunlight. June's voice got even quieter. His wife made it to an evacuation ship, but he went back for something. Maybe to get some tomato seeds, or a picture, or just to say goodbye to his farm. The ship waited as long as it could, but the devourers were getting closer. They had to leave him behind. Minotaur said nothing. She had worked with many survivors over the years, but she had never met someone who remembered so many names, so many details. I know all of them, June continued. Their ages, their jobs, their families, their dreams. I know what they wanted to do with their lives and what they never got to finish. I've spent 15 years learning about every person who died because I pressed that button. The galaxy calls you a hero, Minotaur said carefully. June laughed, but there was no happiness in the sound. Heroes don't murder 847 innocent people. Heroes find another way. Heroes save everyone, not just most people. There wasn't another way, Minotaur said. The Devourers had already stripped half the planet. The defense grid was down. Most of the evacuation ships were destroyed. If you hadn't acted, those 847 people would have died anyway, along with billions of others on dozens of worlds. Maybe, June said. But I'll never know for sure, will I? Maybe if I had waited another hour, the fleet would have found a way to stop them. Maybe if I had been smarter, I could have figured out how to get those last people to safety. Maybe if I had been a real hero, I would have found a way to save everyone. He touched his chest, where the geometric scars lay hidden under his jacket. These scars aren't the worst part. The worst part is waking up every morning knowing that I'm alive because 847 other people aren't. The worst part is being called a hero for the worst day of my life. Minotaur looked at him with her large, dark eyes. In her work, she had seen many kinds of survivors. Some were angry, some were broken, some had found ways to make peace with what had happened to them. But she had never seen anyone who carried guilt like this man did. You saved billions of lives, she said. I know, June replied. That's what makes it so hard to live with. Choi Sejin was packing her few belongings when the alarm started. The sound was different from the usual station alerts, deeper, more urgent, the kind that meant real danger was coming. She had heard alarms like this only once before, 15 years ago on New Harvest. Her hands stopped moving. The small bag fell from her fingers. All around Kepler Station, the alarms kept screaming. Emergency lights flashed red in the corridors. People were running, some toward escape pods, others toward their duty stations. The normal sounds of the busy space station, talking, laughing, the hum of machinery, were replaced by the chaos of emergency. Sujin's door chimed. She opened it to find two station security officers waiting for her. Behind them stood a tall man in a commander's uniform. His face was serious, but she could see fear in his eyes. Miss Choi, the commander said, I am Commander Yoon Tai-ho. We need your help immediately. What's happening? She asked, though part of her already knew. Long-range sensors have detected ships approaching our system, the commander explained as they walked quickly through the corridors. The energy signatures match records from 15 years ago. The Devourers are back. Sujin felt her chest tighten. The geometric scars under her shirt seemed to burn with phantom pain, just like they did in her nightmares. That's impossible. We destroyed them all at New Harvest. We thought we did, Commander Yoon said. But these readings are definitely Devourer technology. The ships are bigger than before, and their energy patterns are more complex. It's like they learned from what happened. They reached the command center, a large room filled with screens and control panels. Officers from different species worked at various stations, their faces tense with concentration. In the center of the room, a huge display showed the Kepler system. Red dots were moving toward the station from the edge of the system. Show her the details, Commander Yoon said to one of his officers. The display changed to show close-up views of the approaching ships. Sujin stared at them with growing horror. They looked like the Devourers she remembered, but different. Bigger. More advanced. The black metal surfaces were covered with new patterns, new weapons, new tools for consuming worlds. How many? She asked quietly. 37 ships, an officer reported. Maybe more behind them. They'll reach the outer planets in 6 hours, and Kepler Station in 12 hours. Sujin looked around the command center. Representatives from dozens of species were gathered there, Krillins, Elari, Vorth, humans, and others she didn't recognize. They were all looking at her with the same expression, hope mixed with desperation. To them, she wasn't just a woman with a tragic past. She was the planet-killer survivor, the one who had faced the Devourers and won. You're the only one who's fought them and lived, Commander Yoon said. We need to know everything about them. How they think, how they attack, how to stop them. I didn't stop them, Sujin said. I just blew up a planet. They died because they happened to be standing on it. But it worked, a Krillin warrior said, stepping forward. You found a way to destroy them when no one else could. The situation is different now, Sujin replied. We're on a space station, not a planet with fusion reactors. I can't just press a button and make everything explode. Then what do we do? Asked an Ilari representative, her large eyes filled with tears. Our worlds have no defenses against these creatures. If they reach the inner systems, billions will die. Sujin stared at the tactical display. The red dots were getting closer, moving steadily toward the heart of the system. In her mind, she could see New Harvest again, the green fields turning gray, the black machines consuming everything in their path, the evacuation ships burning in the sky. She could leave. Commander Yoon couldn't force her to help. There was a transport ship departing for the outer colonies in 2 hours. She could be on it, disappearing into the dark spaces between stars where no one would find her. She had done it before, many times. But if she left, what would happen to all the people looking at her now? What would happen to the billions of beings living on the worlds in this system and beyond? Show me their approach vector, she said quietly. The display changed again, showing the path the Devourer fleet was taking through the system. They were moving in a straight line toward Kepler Station, but they would pass close to several inhabited planets on the way. They've learned it, Sujin said, studying the pattern. Last time, they spread out to consume as much as possible. Now they are focused, organized. They have a specific target. What target? Commander Yoon asked. Us, she replied. They want revenge for New Harvest. They want to destroy the place where the planet killer survivor is hiding. The command center went quiet. Everyone was looking at her, waiting for her to tell them what to do. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. She was just one person, carrying scars and memories and the names of 847 dead people. But to them, she was something more. These aren't the same machines we fought 15 years ago, she continued. They've evolved, adapted, learned from their defeat. The old tactics won't work. Then what will? Commander Yoon asked. Sujin touched her chest, feeling the geometric patterns burned into her skin. The scars weren't just marks of trauma. They were proof that sometimes, saving everyone else meant sacrificing everything you had. I don't know yet, she said. But I'll figure it out. She stepped closer to the tactical display, ready to face her past one more time.